Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We are back here in the race shop after our little trip to Tulsa, Oklahoma to start 2025. It feels good, I'll tell you that. We got a car right here, which is was actually our spare car from last year, and I have two cars here to my left. We're building some new equipment, preparing for a big 2025 season, the 18T. Here, I'll kind of show you what we're up to. So we have this car over here, which this was the car that was sitting upstairs at the end of our last season, which is like 95% new. There's not really any time on most of this equipment. And then next to it, we have a car that will be basically brand new to start the season. And then next to that, we have another car, which is basically gonna be brand new to start the year. So we definitely still have a lot more work to do here in the race shop, but we have made some good progress. And we actually have another car on the other side of the shop, which was just another roller from last season that definitely has more time than anything sitting right here. But feeling really excited. We're gonna have more information as everything's kind of continuing to come together and fall into place. But I'm starting the year with Tarleton Motorsports, and the 18T is probably not going to be on track till about May or June. So that's kind of a small update on what's been going on here in Southern Oregon. But today we're going to be talking about the World of Outlaws new rules that they've added to their 2025 rule book. About 2 months ago, I made a video on High Limit's new rules that they added for 2025 after their inaugural national season out on the road. As you can imagine, as we're going to kind of deep dive into some of it, some of them being new rules and then some are more kind of just like safety stuff, but High Limit and the Outlaws don't 100% align. So if you run your car with one series, it might look different than when you run with the other series. I feel like the differences aren't major, but I think it's just something to be said about, like, if you had your car and you're racing with High Limit on a Friday night and you could go run with the Outlaws on Saturday, you would have to, change or take some equipment off your car. Like, we're gonna look at it, but you couldn't take the exact same piece, not even wash, load it in the trailer and unload it at Outlaw show and technically pass and be allowed to race. So we're here on the Outlaws website. You can see published January 6th rule updates. And as we scroll down on this article, let's just get started from the top. So we're kind of starting off simple here, but the World of Outlaws have put a rule in place, like we're just going to call it the draw rule. A couple people had said it's like the Clinton Boyles rule because that was the last situation where this kind of came up. But every night with the World of Outlaws, each team, whether it's a representative from the team or the driver themselves, have to go to the World of Outlaw Command Center, which is where, kind of everything takes place. The lineups are posted, the pit meeting. They have to go there. Usually it's about around 4 o'clock, and you walk up and the Outlaw official is standing there. Usually it's the same person every time. It kind of has changed throughout the years, but they draw you a pill. Like, they just have a little deal that kind of turns in a circle, right? It pulls a pill out, and that is your number where you're going out in the qualifying order for that show. And if you've been following sprint car racing in my channel specifically, we talk about it, kind of on a nightly basis, that like when you draw, when you're supposed to go out, can definitely give you a little advantage. You could have a better racetrack, or if you're going out at a certain point, like your track could not be as good. And so what tends to happen with the World of Outlaws is if there is 37 cars signed in, they are going to run one flight of qualifying, which is a lot of cars to qualify against each other. Now, once they hit that 38 threshold, they split it into 2 flights. So like, the first half of cars are against each other and the second half are against each other, and they're not competing. They don't mix. So a lot of times when there's a lot of cars, it's beneficial to have both flights, because if the racetrack slows down or for some reason if it speeds up, it's kind of fair for guys to qualify around other cars that are going out when they go out. So the Outlaws have added this rule that once the draw has commenced, like once the draw has began for the night, another team cannot enter a backup car to try to add additional cars to the field to, like, for example, if they were right at 37, a team could technically, like if they had a backup car, they could enter, anybody. They could enter a crew guy and he could go out there and just run a lap, and then that would put them to 38. Like, let's say a team drew a bad pill and they were going to be the last car out. Well, if there's 2 flights versus 1 flight, that could realistically, make or break your night depending on what the track conditions are going to be. And you may be thinking, Tanner, this whole thing kind of sounds ridiculous. Well, yes, to an extent it is, but at the same time, I understand. I have been to Outlaw or High Limit shows where, a racetrack has slowed down a second. So if you're going out last, your night can, I don't want to say it's over before it started, but man, you are sitting at a much bigger disadvantage than one of the first cars that go out. And in reality, that's just the nature of the beast. We accept that before we show up, but they just kind of put this rule in place to where, a team would kind of have to plan ahead of time or not know what they're going to draw. But once the draw starts, teams cannot start pulling down backup cars, which, like I said, this doesn't happen often, but it has happened where teams pull down the backup car. So they kind of just wanted to kibosh that. Draw starts, the night begins. So the second rule they put in place here has to deal with the headers on your sprint car. Here, actually, I think I have an old header sitting over here. Let me grab it. For all you visual people, this right here is the header. There's no muffler here on the end. This is just a straight pipe. This is a header. If you guys remember, in like the middle of this year, it kind of became popular where some of the teams, it started on with Kyle Larson, the Paul Silva 57. They had normal headers that kind of had like an elbow and it turned up the muffler, so it was kind of shooting the exhaust out the side, kind of to prevent the heat from heating up the tire, heating up the shock, kind of in this area. But the rule states only steel and stainless headers allowed, no titanium headers. I can only imagine what a titanium header costs. I saw a couple at Chili Bowl. They're nice, but oh my gosh. But no elbows on the exhaust after the header tube enters the collector will not be allowed. All exhaust must exit towards the rear of the car. And this is going to be a difference because High Limit obviously never mentioned anything about this. So if you run with High Limit, you're going to be allowed to do that. And if you're running with the Outlaws, that is, you know, a big fat X over it. Now, I can't speak on this rule from experience because I never ran a car with it or on my own equipment. I believe the same teams that kind of started kind of experimenting with it, they were winning before. It was just kind of, you know, something to catch people's eye in the pit area or a distraction. The list kind of goes on, whatever you want to say. I just feel like whether this rule's in place or not, like I don't think it's going to make a difference on who's winning and who's losing and, you know, where guys are at. So we have a little change of pace here in this next one, the World of Outlaws, and honestly, I was surprised when I saw this because I didn't think things were heading in this direction, but they matched the High Limits wicker bill rule of the maximum height being 1.5 inches. So I got a wicker bill right here. This is a 2-inch wicker. This goes at the back of your center section of the top wing to kind of catch air. This 2-inch part sticks up. So basically, last year we could only run a 1-inch, which is half of this, and then this is a 2-inch. So they kind of split it right down the middle at 1.5 inches is the largest wicker that you can run on your car. I can tell you this, I really believe like no matter what the rule is, whatever the max is, guys are going to be trying to get every, you know, if it's 1.5 inches, like guys are going to be running 1.5 inch wickers at points in the night or most of the night for the matter of fact. You know, it's just kind of how sprint car racing is. Like, you know, the more wicker you got, I feel like the cars definitely have more grip, maybe almost a little more comfortable to drive in ways too, and in clean and dirty air. Like, I don't know, it's very tough to say because there's so many different factors that they've kind of been, you know, switching the wicker bill rule around. I'm just glad that everyone's on the same page, and hopefully it's something we can kind of continue to take steps in the right direction to make the racing the best that it can be and make dirty air better as well, because, you know, that's a big thing in sprint car racing. When you're behind other cars, it's, man, you can get yourself in some bad situations. You got to be very careful, and you have to know how to aero race around guys and put guys in bad positions so, you know, you can pull away. But yeah, so Outlaws, High Limit, they are on the exact same rules package in this category. So for that, applaud. Glad that we are at least all on the same page, and we'll kind of see how the 1.5 inch wicker, you know, goes throughout 2025. I don't think it's going to be a huge difference because we're kind of just split in the middle, but you know, it is a change. So those were the more 3 serious rule changes I would say that Woo has put in place. The next 3, kind of just roll through them. One of them has to do with the fuel cell. In the new direction, I think kind of where both series probably are heading, it's highly recommended that there's 6 mounting points. So like on our fuel cells, there's 4, just because it's always been that way. You got 2 here on each side, down there, 1 right there, and then 1 up there. So I don't know where the additional mounting points are gonna be, but I think that's kind of something that's probably coming here in the future of sprint car racing. They had a section kind of re-explaining front axles and which ones are allowed, the diameter and the material thickness. And one thing they did put is that the ultralight rear axles are not recommended. So like in sprint car racing, you know, the axles have kind of gotten lighter and a little thinner. You know, us drivers and stuff probably are, you know, everyone, our own worst enemy in dirt racing, you know, trying to make the cars lighter and faster and more speed and more grip. And so now I think they're kind of backing off from where they were because the axles, you know, I think they were kind of starting to see situations where things were probably, just the best way to put it, borderline, you know, for how fast we're going, the speeds, the racetracks. And like the last thing we're trying to do is to build equipment that is going to fail at some point or not hold up in the incident of a situation that happens. And again, they're talking about this axle right here on the rear end. So in general in sprint car racing, I think they're just trying to like look at ways that they can make things safer and not go overboard with trying to save weight and try to make things thin and all that type of stuff. So anyway, that was just a recommendation on the ultralight axles, and they're not going to be allowed in 2026. And the last thing they touched on had to do with seats and with seat spacers. So when spacers are used, they must conform to the seat and the mounting tube of the chassis. It is highly recommended the back mounting spacers are 2 inches or less in length. They also kind of touched on fire suppression systems, which we already kind of know that. You just got to make sure they're actually certified to be able to race that night. So the Outlaws kind of just going over some safety stuff, which we do appreciate, and I think that we got to continue to make our race cars safer and look for things that make this whole deal a better mousetrap. As we get caught up in everything, chasing wins, chasing success, consistency, points, championships, like as drivers, I think it's easy for safety to kind of end up, it's always in the back of your mind. Every driver, I think, like we can all agree on that, but it is easy for it to kind of stay back there and not, you're just so focused on your job, but it is good for the sanctioning bodies, I think, to kind of take those steps in the drivers, and we kind of have to play our part in that as well. And then the manufacturers and who's building all the equipment, like they have to be a part of it as well. So we all kind of just have our role. We just got to, continue to try to move things in the right direction for the betterment of our sport. After going through all these rules, the 2 differences that High Limit made that the Outlaws didn't match have to do with the in-axle inflation system, which we talked about, which basically is a pump that as your bleeder bleeds a tire off, that pump kind of matches and is supposed to put air in the tire. And those are legal with the High Limit Sprint Car Series, and they kind of added it as like a safety feature in their head. For like a long yellow, for a long red, tires bleed way down. Let's say a right rear is supposed to be at 9 pounds. Let's say it's at 4. Driver can't build enough air back before they go green. They go in the first corner, they get tight, they ball up a car, they cause a crash. And so that's what the in-axle inflation system is supposed to be for. And then also here, I have the cockpit adjustable shock. With High Limit, you can have 1 adjustable shock from in the cockpit. The Outlaws mentioned nothing of that. So, basically with them, you cannot have that tool. Which, like I said, that's kind of no different than your wing slider. It's just another tool. So, it's, I guess it's just one thing when you're racing with the World of Outlaws to not worry about. You're just trying to dial that in before you get out on track. But that's a look at what the World of Outlaws have posted now, just about 2.5 weeks ago. It's funny, all the sprint car, the reporters and everything, they're right on this stuff. I was super busy during this time, so I just report a couple weeks after on the rules to let you guys know and then kind of give some of my thoughts. I also kind of take some time to really think about, each of the changes. I think it's easy sometimes when you look at some of this stuff, and not like any of this was necessarily controversial, but it's easy to react on emotion and be like, that's dumb or that's really cool. But sometimes you have to kind of sit and think about it, and then also you got to put yourselves in the Outlaw and High Limit shoes, or the manufacturer's shoes, or the drivers and the car owner's shoes, and you have to look at it from each standpoint, because when you do that, you start to kind of see things a little bit differently. How things look for me as a driver can look completely different as if I were the one that was owning the series. Overall, we just want to keep kind of elevating things to the next level. So I appreciate you guys hanging out with me today. If you have any questions, you want me to go into depth more or clarify in the comment section down below, I'd love to hear from you. 2025 is going to be a great year. We still have more work ahead, and excited to bring you guys along with me for the journey here at Holmes Racing as we build our sprint car operation, to what we want to be a national team one day, and for our races with Tarleton Motorsports, and that's going to be super fun to get to run with those guys this year as well. All right, we'll see you in the next video. Deuces.